I guess, common example is the act of giving one's wealth. However, giving in general is not restricted to just giving away one's wealth. Some other examples include giving away of one's time, one's efforts, and of course giving away opportunities that people could be spending elsewhere. So he says, what is your opinion? And Ismail salamullahi alayhi responds by saying, Ya abati if'al ma tu'mar. O my father, do what you are commanded. Satajiduni insha'Allah min as-sabirin. That you shall find me insha'Allah amongst those who are patient. This is an example given to us in the Quran to highlight to us not only the act of wasalamuhu alayhi talks about what are known as the makarimul akhlaq, the noble virtues. The noble virtues are the virtues that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala has considered the most praiseworthy virtues that mankind can acquire. And Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam lists them. He mentions 10 of them, and from amongst them there is the example of sabr, patience. There is the example of forbearance, al-hilm. He says amongst them is as-sakha, which is generosity, which is related to tonight's topic. He says from amongst them is shuja'a, courage, which is again very relevant to Karbala. And he lists all 10 of them. I won't go into the details of all of them because that in itself requires many hours of time to explain what each one is and all the details and whatnot. But a final one that he mentions is eloquence, fasaha. And some of these are even talked about in the famous sermon of Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi in the court of Yazid, where he begins by saying, Ayyuhan nas, u'atina sittan wa fuddil of forgiving as well as eloquence. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullah alayhi has a very eloquent speech thereafter. So some of these qualities that are known as the makarim al-akhlaq are those mentioned by Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi says that of these makarim al-akhlaq, these 10 noble and virtuous qualities that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala has made the height of what mankind can aim for, he says that one of them is the leader and the master and the peak of them. He says, Al-Ithar أعلى المكارم. This act of self-sacrifice is the highest noble quality. And in another narration, very similar, he says, Al-Ithar ghayatul makarim, that this self-sacrifice is the very peak of these noble qualities. And this is in line with many other types of traditions from the Ahlul Bayt, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'in, in which they talk about how if there is a group of things, there is always one that is the master of them. For example, when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam talks about Bani Adam, he says, Ana Sayyidi Bani Adam, that I am the master of the children of. Before we go into the detail of what self-sacrifice is or ithar is, let's talk about one of the stepping stones that get one to the level of ithar or self-sacrifice, which is what we opened with, which is the act of giving. And we talked about how there's different examples of giving. There's giving away of wealth, there's giving away of time, there's giving away of energy and effort and opportunity. There's different types of giving. But there's also different states within one can perform this act of giving. For example, one can give away, and if we are to use the example of wealth, one can give away things that they don't need, and this is one level of giving. And I would just want to make clear, all levels of giving are praiseworthy. We're not trying to say that if something is on a low level that it is not a good thing altogether. All types of giving are praiseworthy. So giving away from the example of wealth of what somebody doesn't need is one level. Another type of giving is to give away in times of abundance. For example, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has blessed me with a lot of wealth that I feel wealthy, that I'm happy to give away because I have more than enough. So that's again another type of giving. Another type of giving is to give away in times of difficulty when I myself have very little to work with. And in fact, this is one of the more difficult and praiseworthy types of giving. In fact, Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi mentions in a hadith that he says that frequently I find myself in times of difficulty, but I trade with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by giving away in charity. That through this giving of charity, I receive more and my circumstances are improved. And this is the manner of the relationship of the believer with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with respect to giving, and specifically with giving in charity. And we have one other final type of giving, which is the type of giving which falls into the category of self-sacrifice. What do we mean by this? That not only am I going to give in a time of difficulty, that it is going to cause difficulty for me, but also because I prefer that somebody else or something else, their conditions are improved, even if my own conditions become worse. This is what is called self-sacrifice or al-ithar. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we want to look at ithar and self-sacrifice, Karbala can be seen as a perfect spotlight to highlight so many examples of self-sacrifice. Take the example, and last night, as you know, was the night of the Ansar. We commemorated the Ansar, the supporters of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'in. May Allah tabarak wa ta'ala enlist us from amongst them. That if we look at some examples, such as the example of Wahab, who was prior to Karbala a Christian and became a Muslim at the hand of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam, the history states that he was a newlywed. So consider the fact that Wahab was willing to sacrifice this newly wedded state and this period of bliss and happiness in his life and give up his life for Abu Abdullah al-Husayn salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Take the example of Muslim ibn Awsijah, who was there present in Karbala, one of the very close companions of Habib ibn Madahir al-Asadi alayhi salam, who we also mentioned last night. Muslim ibn Awsijah, it is said, fought, and his mother was present in Karbala. He fought so bravely that he initially lost one hand. And he came back to his mother and he asked her, is this enough? And she said to him, no, this is not enough. So he fought and he fought and he fought and he lost his other hand. And he returns back to his mother and he asks her, is this enough? And she says to him, no, my son, I will not be happy until you sacrifice your entire life for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And such was the case with Muslim ibn Awsija, that he sacrificed his entire life for the master of the martyrs, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. So Karbala is a university of self-sacrifice and giving. And when we look into the history as well of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see nothing but example after example of self-sacrifice. And I'm listing these examples not only for us to learn that this act of self-sacrifice is so central to the Ahlul Bayt salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'een, but also for us to allow us to learn how some people, such as he whom we are commemorating tonight, who I'll get to insha'Allah, how they attained this lofty standard that they got to. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That in the early days of Islam, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam and the very few companions that believed at the hands of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, in the very early period of Islam, in the early days of the Ba'atha and Nabawiyya al-Sharifa, this proclamation of Islam, they were distanced and what we call antagonized or cast aside by the mushrikeen of Mecca, that they were forced to live in an area on the outskirts of Mecca known as the Sha'b of Abu Talib alayhi salam. This was not a few days, this was not a week or a few months, this was for a period of 3 years that Khadija salamullahi alayha narrates that the Muslims that were with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam went through so much difficulty by being cast out by the Meccans that they were not allowed to trade, they were not allowed to buy and sell, meaning that even food they were deprived of, that the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, such as Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullah alayhi and Ja'far al-Tayyar and many other noble companions that were with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi at that time, they were forced to eat grass. That's how destitute and desperate they were at the time, at that particular time in the early days of the prophethood. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, being the master of them, highlights to us that even in this kind of condition, in this period of desperation, that as a noble prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, that even in that state he was able to outdo them. What do we mean? In the times of the Arabs, when they used to go through famine is a period when there's not enough food for everybody. They used to do this thing, which is to tie a stone to their stomachs. This stone was known as the Hajar al-Maja'a, the hunger stone. And the purpose of tying it to their stomachs was to relieve the pain of the hunger, that by putting pressure on the stomach, this would allow the pain to subside. That the historians narrate that when the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would tie a stone around their waists, this Hajar al-Maja'a, the hunger stone, to relieve their pain, they narrate that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi went through so much hunger he had to tie 2 stones to his stomach sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is an example that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi is setting for us to show us that even in this kind of condition, that even though he is the leader amongst them, he leads them with regards to the example, and he is willing to forbear even more hunger than the rest of them. And don't think that this was just for a period of 3 years. Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam never in his entire life went 3 consecutive days with a full stomach. Meaning that there was no period of 3 days where he was able to eat on every single one of those days. In fact, many days, many more days than often, he would have to go through hunger. And to highlight to you that this is not only forced upon Rasulullah. So some people might say, well, that was his condition, he had to go through that. We can say no, that we have examples and proof that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not only went through that, but chose to go through that. That one day Israfil salamullah alayhi, the great angel of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, descended upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is willing to give you the keys to the heavens of the earth, meaning that you have access to the treasures of the heavens and the earth, meaning that you'll be able to take whatever you wish of the wealth of this dunya, and you will not have any reward in the akhirah decreased for you? He said to him, no, Ya Israfil, I prefer to be a humble prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he says that I prefer to be in two states, one day satisfied and one day in a state of hunger. So imagine that opportunity that you are able to acquire and to have under your control the wealth of the entire world, and yet you deliberately decide that you wish to not proceed with this and to not accept this, and to instead accept to be in the state of both satisfied one day and hunger the other. And this is one of the prime examples of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam with relation to self-sacrifice. Let us look, for example, at another example from the Quran. As we read in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ. And from amongst the people is he who sells his soul seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the followers of Ahlul Bayt, salawatullahi alayhim ajma'in, we take pride in this ayah. Why? Because it was revealed on the night of Hijrah, when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was under the threat of the mushrikeen of Mecca, that they plotted to kill him, and he had to leave in the middle of the night, leave his house in Medina and in Mecca and go towards Medina. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam one day calls Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi alayhi, and he says, Ya Ali, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen you to take my place in my bed sheets, so that the enemies, when they come to conspire to kill me, they are misled. That I'm providing a summary of the story, but the essence is that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala has chosen you, O Ali, to take my place, and your life will be at risk. And Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi takes pride in this, and he says that verily it is an honor to be a sacrifice for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this is the reason why this ayah was sent down. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ. That from amongst the people is he who sells his soul seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ayat that we opened with tonight are another example, and then yet again another example from the blessed household of prophethood, that the traditions state that one day Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, whilst they were young, salamullahi alayhima, were sick, and they went to Rasulullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, and Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha, go to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. They ask him, Ya Rasulullah, Al-Hasan and Hussein are in a very, very sick state. What should we do? He said to them, fast for 3 days, seeking the answer from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking the faraj, the relief of their sickness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they fast the first day, and when it comes time for iftar, the tradition states, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam states that when it comes to the time of iftar, at the very moment they were about to break their fast, they hear a knock on the door. And they hear a caller calling out that I am a poor person and I am hungry. Do you have anything to feed me? And Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi takes the food and he gives it to the poor person. And they break their fast that night with only water. And on the second day they fast once again. And again at the time of iftar they hear a knock on the door. And the caller calls out that I am an orphan. Is there anyone here to help me with some food? And again, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi takes the food that they had prepared that night and gives it to the orphan. And on the third day, again, after completing their fast at the time of iftar, they hear a third knock on the door, and the man calls out that I am a prisoner of war. I'm a prisoner. Can you please help me and give me some food to eat? And for the third time, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi takes the food and offers it to the prisoner. And again, for the third consecutive night, they break their fast with water alone. And Allah tabarak wa ta'ala revealed in relation to this, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. And they feed, they give away their food on His love, meaning the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a poor person and an orphan and a prisoner. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. That we only feed you seeking the proximity and countenance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the special mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we desire from you no thanks and no reward. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And someone might say that this was an isolated example. I say to them, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed other ayat that are very, very similar to this and very much in line with tonight's topic, that again, Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi states that one day Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha prepared some barley, which is an inferior to even wheat, for her household to eat. And again, they hear a knock on the door. And again, a poor person called out that I am a poor person, I require some food. And Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi takes 1/3 of what Fatima al-Zahra prepared that day and gave it to the poor person. And before long, they hear a second knock on the door. And an orphan again this time calls out that I am an orphan and I am hungry. And Amir al-Mu'mineen takes a second third and gives it to the orphan. And on the third occasion they hear a third knock on the door, and they hear again that I am a prisoner, can you help me with some food? And again the Amir al-Mu'mineen takes the third of the food and gives it away to the prisoner. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals in relation to this, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ, that they sacrifice their own souls even though in their own state they are destitute. صَلُّوا عَلَىٰ مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ. So we are mentioning these examples of self-sacrifice in order for us to truly appreciate one of the greatest sacrifices made in Karbala. We talked a few nights ago on the night of al-Baneen, salamullahi alayha, that when we look at al-Baneen and we look at the manner in which she handled the news that had arrived from Bishr, that when Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam commanded Bishr, this poet, to enter Medina and to announce that Abu Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam had been killed, when we see this interaction between al-Baneen and Bishr ibn Hadlam, we see nothing but self-sacrifice from al-Baneen. Al-Baneen is told by Bishr, O al-Baneen, may Allah magnify your reward. أَعْظَمَ اللَّهُ لَكِ الْأَجْرِ. You have lost your son Ja'far. And he repeats this. He repeats this in relation to her son Ja'far. He repeats it in relation to her son Uthman and to Abdullah, until she gets to the hero and the one whom we are commemorating tonight, Al-Abbas ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi lidhikrihi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That when we want to try to understand Al-Abbas ibn Ali salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, we need to accept that it is a fact that Al-Abbas truly has no equal. When you want to understand self-sacrifice, the ideal person, the ideal reference point is Al-Abbas ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi alayhi. Why is this the case? When we look at Al-Abbas, first of all, let's look at where Al-Abbas came from. The fact that his father is Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, about whom many of these ayat of the Quran, specifically talking about self-sacrifice, they were revealed about Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And on the other hand, his mother al-Baneen, that was so self-sacrificial. Remember, we mentioned it the other night that when she married Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha after the martyrdom of Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alameen, she said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Ali, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, do not call me by my name Fatima in front of Al-Hassan and Hussein and Zainab and Kulthum. Why, Ya al-Baneen? Because she didn't want to remind them of their mother Fatima and how much grief that would cause them. Look at this level of self-sacrifice of al-Baneen. So is it a surprise, therefore, or as a result, that someone like Al-Abbas ibn Ali, who has been praised throughout history as being the most self-sacrificial figure on the day of Ashura, aside from Imam al-Husayn salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Let's put everything into context. He says about Al-Abbas. He says Al-Abbas salawatullahi alayhi was someone who was prudent Prudent means someone who was very tactical. He was very guardful of his religion. He was someone he would watch out for any aspect of haram and avoid the haram, and any chance to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the utmost, he would take that opportunity. And this is something that we mention in the ziyarah of Abu Fadl al-Abbas salamullah alayhi, that we say, peace be upon you, O he who rushed towards that which other people refrained from. What does this mean? It means that they refrained from the reward available to them, whilst Al-Abbas ibn Ali salawatullah alayhi would rush towards it. And this is the example of Abu Fadl al-Abbas salamullah alayhi in relation to many aspects of his life, not just on the day of Ashura. That the tradition states that even as a youngster, he would consider his elder brothers Al-Hasan wal-Husayn salamullah alayhima as masters, and he would go wherever they would go, and if anyone caused them harm, he would go after them, and if anyone sought to annoy them, he would relieve his brothers of their difficulties. And Al-Abbas very much grew up with this identity and purpose that he was the protector of Al-Hasani wal-Husayn salamullahi alayhima. We talked on the first night about identity and how one should formalize and internalize this identity as a believer in this world. Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam took that to the next level, that not only did he accept the commands of the religion and the obediences and the obligations to avoid the haram and to only pursue that which is permissible, but he undertook that identity and that purpose of being the slave and the servant of Al-Hasan wal-Husayn salamullahi alayhima on the night of the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Ayman comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha goes to Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi, and she says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, O my father, Ayman has told me about Karbala. Please bear in mind that this is 30 years before Karbala. She asks Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, is what Ayman is what she said true? Is it the case that Abu Abdullah salawatullahi alayhi will be martyred and we will be with him and taken as prisoners, etc., etc.? And Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi comforts Zainab salamullah alayha, and he says to her that yes, Zainab, it is true. So Zainab has one request. She says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, O my father, grant me a protector. Who is going to protect me on that day? And Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi immediately calls out to the members of his household and he says, Ud'u li Abbasa, call to me Abbas. He takes the hand of Al-Abbas ibn Ali and he places it in the hand of Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayhima. And he says to Abbas, Abbas, this is my amana to you. This is my security and my trust to you. Meaning Zainab salamullahi alayha, that wherever she goes, you go. Wherever her children go, you go. Whatever she desires, fulfill that request. And this is something that the tradition states, that Al-Abbas ibn Ali salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, that from the moment they left Medina towards Mecca and from Mecca towards Iraq, he never left the presence of Zainab salamullahi alayha, and he always looked after her and he always looked to attend her needs, and not only looked to attend her needs, but attended to her needs in the fastest and quickest way possible. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let us go back to the tradition of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, our uncle Abbas salamullah alayhi, he takes pride that he's his uncle. He says that he was prudent, but he also mentions this quality that we are talking about, that he is self-sacrificial, that he fought alongside Abu Abdullah salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi until he joined the ranks of the martyrs, until he became a martyr. And in another tradition, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam takes pride in his uncle, and he says, Rahimallah ammi al-Abbas, may Allah have mercy on my uncle Abu Fadl al-Abbas. Why? Because he sacrificed himself for the sake of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam until he lost his two hands. And as a reward for this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed him to fly with two wings in Jannah, just as his uncle Ja'far al-Tayyar salamullahi alayhi. In another tradition, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam talks about the characteristics of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He says that he was like a handsome moon, that He was just 30, he was 34 years old, in the prime of his youth physically, and in the prime of his life mentally, and in the prime of his life spiritually. So we talked earlier about sacrifice. It's enough for us to say that Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam sacrificed his life, but not only did he sacrifice any life, it's not like he sacrificed his life at the end of his life when he was old and had given up on life and had given up on opportunity. He sacrificed his life at the very peak of his life, in the peak of his energy, whilst he had a family to look after, whilst he had a wife and children, etc., etc. Further adding to this notion of sacrifice from Abu Fadl al-Abbas, salamullahi alayhi. Let us go to the musibah, and what a musibah it is. The 7th of Muharram, this night of the 7th that we deliberately devote to Abu Fadl al-Abbas, salamullahi alayhi, for a very specific reason. Because Bani Umayyah decided that on the 7th of Muharram that there would be no more water available to the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. This thirst that is so central to Karbala started on the 7th of Muharram. Prior to that, by the way, brothers and sisters, Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam every single day would take the water carrier, and get water for the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam from the river Furat. But it was on the 7th that the command came from Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad to Umar ibn Sa'ad alayhima la'natullah, that there is to be no more water for Abu Abdullah. Place 4,000 men on the banks of the Furat so that there is no more water for Hussein, so that the circumstances will become more severe and that they relent to our requests. After all, what were Bani Umayyah requesting? They were requesting the allegiance of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam and Bani Hashim, so that this false notion of Khilafah would be acceptable to Yazid ibn Muawiyah alayhima la'natullah. And on the day of Ashura, just before the battle was to begin, Shimr ibn al-Jawshan alayhi la'natullah goes towards the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi. He calls out in a loud voice, "Where are our cousins? Where is Abbas and where are his brothers?" To give context to what Shimr was saying alayhi la'natullah, Shimr ibn al-Jawshan was from the tribe of Kulab, the very same tribe that the mother of Al-Abbas, al-Baneen, salamullahi alayhima, was from. And this is why Shimr was using these words. He's trying to use emotion. He says, "Where are our cousins? Where is Abbas and where are his brothers?" Abbas, salamullahi alayhi, refused to answer Shimr. And Shimr called a second time and a third time. Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi goes to Abu Fadl al-Abbas salamullahi alayhi. He says to him, "Oh Abbas, I know he is a lewd person. I know he is a son of haram, but go to him and answer him. See what he has to say." So Al-Abbas salamullahi alayhi and his brothers, they go towards Shimr. Shimr has an offer to make. He says to him, "Oh Abbas, you are a relative of us. We want to offer you this chance to be free. We want to offer you this amana, a security, that you will be free to go. We will give you a good life. We will give you wealth. We will give you an honorable standing in the community. We will give you a nice residence. And we will fulfill all your needs in the dunya. That just accept this allegiance of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and you will be free to go." What does Abbas salamullahi alayhi do? He becomes angry. He says, "Wayhakum." He curses them and he says to them, "Woe be to you that you offer me security whilst the son of Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi is left alone in Karbala. How can you offer me an amana and Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi is left all alone to be standing in Karbala? Is this a joke?" And Abu Fadl al-Abbas salamullahi alayhi returns to the flank of Hussein salamullahi alayhi and tells him what happened. As you know, brothers and sisters, the situation on the day of Ashura intensified hour by hour. The companions one by one fell, and the Ahlul Bayt salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, one by one they would fall as well, and we'll get to some of them in the future nights inshaAllah, until the vast majority of the household of Hussein had been killed. The sons of Aqil have been killed. The sons of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam have also been killed. We see that there were very few members left, and throughout this whole time Abu Fadl Al-Abbas salamullah alayhi was the one picking up the dismembered pieces of the bodies of Bani Hashim, helping Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein overcome these difficulties. And in this heat of the moment, in this intense heat, all the while the children are calling out, Al-Atash, Al-Atash, this thirst that is killing us. So Abu Fadl Al-Abbas salamullahi alayhi, he goes to Abu Abdullah al-Husayn and he says to him, "Oh my master," he says to him, "Do I have permission to go out and face the enemy? For they have killed my brothers and I want to seek their revenge. وَلَقَدْ ضَاقَ صَدْرِي," and my chest has become compressed over this, meaning that I can't take it anymore, that I can't bear to see this life in front of me, that my family are being killed one by one, and I, being Abbas ibn Ali, the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I can't stand to see this happen and not fight back." Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says to him, "Oh Abbas, I cannot let you go out. You are the bearer of the standard of my army. You are the protector of my family, and if you go, then all of us will go." And in this moment, the cries of the children are getting louder. They are calling out, the thirst is killing us." Imam al-Hussein turns to Abu Fadl al-Abbas and he says to him, "Oh Abbas, that if you must indeed do something, then bring back to the camp, bring back to the children some water to drink." Abu Fadl al-Abbas says, "Very well." He mounts the horse. In one hand is the standard of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, and over his shoulder is the water carrier. He rides towards the enemy like a handsome moon in the middle of the night. When the enemies see him running towards them on his horse, they scatter in different directions, because Abu Fadl al-Abbas, they knew, was a valiant warrior, that truly he was the reflection of his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. The narration states that Abu Fadl al-Abbas, just to get to the water, went through so much difficulty. It was not an easy path, that he had to navigate through different sections of the desert and through different areas where there were palm trees, and the enemies from different distances would shower him with different weapons such as arrows and spears and stones. He fights valiantly, killing members of the enemy along the way, and he finally reaches the water of Furat, that one can only imagine what level of thirst Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam was going through. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that the internal organs Abu Fadl al-Abbas, his internal organs were burning like charcoals when he reached the water, that he would not have been to blame if he just took a single sip of water. And yet the traditions state that when Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam took some water in his palm, he looks at this water, he looks at how clear it is and how sweet it looks and how cool it is in his hands. He takes all this and he looks into the water and he says, "O soul of mine, that is after Hussein in precedence, how can you think of drinking this cool water when the son of Fatima is deprived of this water?" He fills the water carrier and he mounts it upon his shoulder and he returns to his horse. All this while the enemies plotted and they schemed in order to prevent Abu Fadl al-Abbas from getting back to the camp. He goes back on his horse and he begins riding back to the camp of Hussein. The enemies conspire to push Abu Fadl al-Abbas into an area where his horse was unable to run freely, and all the while the arrows and the spears would continue to shower in the direction of Abbas. The narration states that two enemies were hiding behind some palm trees.
knees. They waited for the horse of Abbas to draw nearer. One of them carrying a sword, another carrying an iron pillar. When Abbas drew nearer to them, they say that they fell into a wrestle, that one of them by the name of Hakim ibn Tufail took the right arm of Abu Fadl al-Abbas, and he proceeded to sever the right hand of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He called out that by Allah, even if they sever my right hand, that I shall avenge my master, the Imam, and my religion until the end. And he continues riding, minus one arm, but with the same level of determination. He carries the flag in his left arm this time. They say that these enemies were very persistent, and they then waited for him behind a second palm tree. They say that as the horse drew nearer, that once again one of them was successful in taking the left arm of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. رحم الله من نادى وعباسا. He took the left hand of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He proceeded to sever the second hand of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He calls out, he says, O soul, do not fear these disbelievers, that out of their anger they have cut your left hand, and have good tidings of the mercy of a generous Lord, who is the master of prophets, whom you are racing towards. And Abu Fadl al-Abbas continues the narration, states, an archer then prepared his arrow. He aimed it at Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He strikes with the arrow the right eye of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. At this moment, the time became very difficult. He now has two hands and one less eye with which to see, and Abu Fadl al-Abbas was still yet determined. They say that he continued to carry the water carrier with his mouth, but all hope was lost when a second arrow pierced this water carrier, and he felt the water spill all over him and all in front of the horse. He falls to the ground, and an enemy with an iron pillar struck the head of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. A strike so severe it severed the helmet on the head of Abu Fadl al-Abbas, and it struck the head of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. That in this moment Abu Fadl al-Abbas, realizing that there is very little hope, he calls out, Akhi ya Hussein. He says, oh my brother Hussein, help him who requests your help. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam rushes out like a lion, and he kills the one who struck Abu Fadl al-Abbas ibn Ali. Remember that Abu Fadl has an arrow in his eye, and his face is filled with blood. He is unable to see. Imam al-Hussein, he draws nearer to Abu Fadl al-Abbas ibn Ali. He takes the head of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. Abu Fadl al-Abbas didn't know that it was his brother. He says, oh man, if you are with us, then please spare me, and if you are against us, then also allow us to die peacefully. He says, who are you? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says to him, oh my brother Abbas, that I am indeed your brother. They share a final moment together. The narration states that as Abu Fadl al-Abbas was leaving this world, he would remove his head from the lap of Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam asked him, oh my brother Abbas, why is it that you remove your head from my lap? I am your brother. He said to him, oh my master Hussein, that look at me now, I am about to enter Jannah with my head in your lap, oh my beloved master. He said to him, in a few moments, who will your head head be? Whose hands and whose lap will your head be? Ya Aba Abdullah, inna lillah وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلمون الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this blessed night through Bab al-Hawa'ij Al-Abbas ibn Ali salamullahi alayhi to accept these majalis held for his remembrance and the remembrance of his brother, to enlist us amongst those considered amongst the supporters of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, to elevate our statuses so that we acquire these noble virtues such as self-sacrifice so perfectly exhibited by Al-Abbas ibn Ali salamullahi alayhi on the 10th of Muharram. And we ask that we are enlisted amongst the supporters of the revenge